Hello, my name is Amy Singler, and I spent a lot of time thinking about rivers and river restoration and really the ecological restoration movement in general. I'm really excited to be here with you today and able to share a lot of what I've learned over my time, over 20 years of experience working on rivers and river restoration, a lot around dam removal, with experience here in the United States and also collaborating with colleagues internationally as well to think about how we can really grow this movement. Today, I'm going to be talking about lessons from the United States and building a river restoration movement. I work in a shared position for American Rivers and also for the Nature Conservancy. Before I get too deep into talking about restoration and rivers, I just wanted to root us in, really think about us lucky people who get to work on water restoration and protection. And this slide certainly captures how I feel when I'm around water. It is magical in its beauty, serenity, and power. And it's all of those things that make it so critical to life and to life on our planet. Our human and many of our ecological communities depend on fresh water in particular. And so as I get us going on river restoration, first I'd like to ground us further in why we do this work and remind us of what's at stake that underpins what it is that we're looking to achieve. At American Rivers and the Nature Conservancy, we understand the value of freshwater ecosystems and the importance of river connectivity in particular. We have goals to ensure clean water and healthy ecosystems for both human and ecological communities, and we are working across all of the factors that impact the health of freshwater, including managing for clean water, managing land use practices, and ensuring adequate protection to allow us to sustain that long-term health and connectivity. And underscoring all of this work that we do, just a reminder here on this slide that while our freshwater ecosystems cover less than 1% of the planet, they do provide some of the most important ecosystem services. Freshwater populations are declining faster than terrestrial or marine, and yet these systems receive less conservation investments than others. This is a map of the world's free-flowing rivers with contiguous river stretches that have good connectivity status in blue and impacted rivers with reduced connectivity in red. Dams and reservoirs and the upstream and downstream fragmentation and flow regulation caused by those dams are the leading contributors to the loss of river connectivity. If you haven't taken a look at this paper and are familiar with this map, I certainly recommend it. It's really well done from Nature in 2019. Here we are over in Europe. You see a certain amount of pink, a lot of red, a little bit of green and blue in there. And there's a lot of really great work happening in Europe. I know that there are others speaking on that at this conference. I'm going to turn our attention to the United States and what we've been doing and what we've learned. You can see all of those red lines. It does not look good when you're looking for rivers with good connectivity status. So let's dive into the United States a little bit further. This is a map of the rivers of the US without all of those fragmented red lines from the previous slide. This is where we started, and I think serves as a real inspiration for the beauty of our ecosystems. You can see all those connected rivers and those lines, and it's really cool to see the way that they flow and think about how that impacts and influences our landscapes and our communities. But when we impose the map of dams in the United States, we see why we have those red lines. We have hundreds of thousands, over 1 million by some estimates, of dams in the United States. Another way of looking at that is that if there were no dams in the United States, we would have over 6,000 connected stream networks. So these are networks that all drain to the same point. But when we remap those stream networks, we actually have suddenly segmented our landscape from 6,000 stream networks all the way into over 54,000 networks. And so when you look at these maps, you see what the impacts that dams have, not just on, they really are fragmenting our ecosystems. And it's why I think that river connectivity is really one of the most critical things that we can be thinking about and looking to restore. And so that's where I'm going to focus my talk today. These dams, the tens of thousands to millions of them, they all look different, with a wide range of types, structure, and use. We know that many dams serve important uses, but regardless, we also know that they have an impact on our freshwater systems. And this is why we're taking a second look at them. For dams that serve a critical need that we cannot replace otherwise, for instance, possibly some water supply reservoirs, those structures may likely need to remain in place for the time being until alternatives can be found. However, many people just assume that all dams are currently serving a use, when actually only a very small fraction of the dams provide many of the benefits that people think of. For instance, less than 3% of dams in the United States are hydropower, and less than 17% are thought to provide flood protection. And yet, these are commonly what people think of that our dams do. So there are tens of thousands of outdated, obsolete dams nationwide whose impact on ecology and public safety outweigh the benefits that they provide. And there are lots of opportunities out there where we can make a different decision for our rivers and ensure healthier systems. My talk today is focused on building a movement to restore rivers through dam removal. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time discussing the impacts of dams, but I do want to say a little bit about why I found this work so foundational to ecosystem restoration and why we want to see it grow both within the US but also across the world. As I said, we know that dams of all sizes and type impact river ecology, and that's because rivers are fundamentally long, linear, and dynamic ecosystems, and dams disrupt both the system itself through that block, but also the function of that river. And river-dependent species, they need that flowing water. We know that there's diversity of habitat within each river and each river segment. Cool, deep pools provide refugia. Rocky and shallow sandbars can be important nesting habitats. Rapids oxygenate the water. And slower floodplains are areas where rivers can deposit sediment and nutrients and provide for refuge during higher water events. I know that some ecological restoration projects are particularly focused on specific species. Sometimes I feel like rivers and working on rivers, that they're an animal in and of themselves. And what I love about dam removal is that we are restoring river function. In a lot of ways, we're giving the river back to the landscape. We're allowing it to move, we're allowing it to change, we're allowing it to flow in the ways that it would naturally. Of course, within the extent that we can safely. And that means that we're able to restore a diversity of habitat types for the range of species that depend on that system. And when we remove a dam, we reconnect networks of tributaries and the landscapes. And I find that really beautiful and powerful to be a part of creating that type of synergy. So when we're thinking about expanding this practice and thinking about how do we make that happen, let's turn and look at lessons from the dam removal movement and how we've built that in the last 20 years. When we talk about the modern dam removal movement, we're drawn to the events of 1999 on the Kennebec River in Maine. This was the Edwards Dam, a hydropower dam, and it had blocked the river for 162 years. It generated a very small amount of hydropower, only 3.5 megawatts. That's about the same amount as 1 or 2 wind turbines would produce. And this was the first time, this project, that the federal agency that licenses dams, in the United States, that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that agency ordered a dam removed against the wishes of its owner because it was recognized that the environmental costs outweighed the economic benefits of that dam. This decision didn't just happen. It was certainly the result of a lot of advocacy from partners in the state of Maine, American Rivers, and other organizations. We pushed the federal agency to use an existing law that requires equal consideration of power and non-powered values when evaluating whether or not a dam should be licensed for hydropower, and it worked. The removal started on July 1st, 1999, ultimately opening up 17 miles of habitat for 10 species of migratory fish native to this river. This is the Kennebec River in Augusta, Maine today. The dam was just upstream on this river in this picture. A decade later, following the removal of a second dam on an upstream tributary that really multiplied the benefits from the original dam removal, there's millions of river herring returning to the river. And today, the Kennebec River has the largest run of river herring on the east coast of the United States. Other migratory species like striped bass are also doing really well. You can actually sit along the banks in lounge chairs and watch sturgeon jump out of the water in the spring. It's pretty well known that when I go to the river, I almost never see fish, and even I see these big, amazing dinosaur fish jumping up out of the river. So I know that there's got to be a lot of them in there. Thanks to the dam removal, what was once a place where the buildings were built facing away from the river, and people would even sometimes get sick if they were swimming in the water, this is now a river and a city where people come to spend time on and in the water. And for me, I was just beginning my career in river advocacy and restoration in 1999, working at a state rivers program just a couple hours south of this project. So for me, I have really had the opportunity to grow my career in this river restoration movement. And so I'm going to spend the rest of this talking about what have we learned in the last 20 years on how to build a movement and where are we going. Thanks to the momentum started with the Edwards Dam, today we have a strong and growing dam removal movement in the US, as you can see from this graph. From 1912 through 2021, 1,789 dams have been removed in the US. 95% of those have been since 1980, so that's really where we've seen the bulk of this work. It's worth knowing we did see a drop-off in 2021 due to the pandemic, not that surprisingly, but we're moving forward. So let's talk about the factors that led to these numbers. I'd like to start with considering that dam removal first requires a real change of thinking. The reality is that dams are aging and require maintenance. Rather than assuming that those dams are going to stay in place, we have opportunities to evaluate the usefulness of each dam and consider if its costs outweigh its benefits. And in those cases where it's time for us to evaluate another option, we might have an opportunity for removal. So a lot of our dam removals, particularly in the first 10 to 15 years, have been at places where people realized they did not need or want their dam anymore. But first we had to start asking that question. And for a long time we didn't. Coming out of that pipe, that's actually, that water, that's actually the dam in this picture. And it's hard to imagine that anybody looked at this structure at one point in time and said, oh yeah, that's a structure that we should keep. It's totally serving a purpose. Yes, there's a road over the top of it that would need to be repaired in some way. But for decades, what we did was we built fishways. We had to bucket and lift fish up and over this dam because those fishways weren't adequate for the alewife. And you have to wonder, is this really the best we can do at a structure like this, or is there an alternative? Maybe that dam doesn't need to be there anymore. And we've started asking that question over and over again. When we have a dam that's aging or not serving its purpose anymore, we're starting to ask that question like as just a part of regular maintenance questions. Do we need this dam anymore? And it's not just the ugly ones that are falling apart. We're even removing water supply dams. This is a dam that was on national forest land in the northeastern US that wasn't being used, and yet it was being maintained because that just seemed to be the thing to do. We asked a question and we got a different answer. That dam did not need to stay in place. So we're thinking creatively. So instead of seeing places where projects are too complicated or too contentious, we're seeing real potential because people are beginning to understand this work at multiple levels, both the benefits to the natural resource and the fisheries and the water quality, but also the benefits in terms of economics and how much less it costs over the long term to remove these structures rather than continue to maintain dams that we don't need anymore. This is another great example from my colleagues in New Jersey, the Columbia Lake Dam. And this is a dam that was an active hydropower dam. It wasn't generating that much hydropower. It was on a river system that was really important for migratory species. And so we were able to remove this dam, actually replace the small amount of hydropower with solar panels nearby. And today there's a free-flowing river in this location. And in a lot of cases, advocates have been able to use a series of environmental laws to advocate for fisheries and river protection and restoration. Pictured on this slide is a suite of federal laws around fish and wildlife protection, clean water requirements, endangered species, and the evaluation of impacts under the Federal Power Act. And together, these laws are really important. I would say that for many projects, these have really underpinned a lot of places where we've been able to really push a decision. Those were the laws that were key that we used on the Kennebec River, that first big project I talked about from 1999. And we used them again a decade later on the Elwha River, where 2 dams in a national park were blocking critical endangered salmon habitat in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. The dams had been built before the passage of some of those environmental laws, and so it wasn't until they needed a new federal hydropower license that advocates were able to push for reconsideration of these dams. We tore down 2 dams on the Elwha River, which made this the largest dam removal and ecosystem restoration project in history. At 70 meters tall, the upper dam, Glines Canyon Dam, was the tallest ever removed at the time that it happened. I don't know if that's still the case. It was a few years ago, but it was sizable and led to pretty exciting and phenomenal results for the system. You can see the project in process here behind me. So those key environmental laws at the federal level that I talked about a little bit early were really critical to getting some of those big and foundational projects accomplished, leading to really phenomenal results for the ecosystem. But we're also working on other types of issues because we know that the majority of dams don't have a federal license. And so how can we tackle enabling conditions that are going to impact and allow for more opportunities across smaller dams to be removed as well? And so we think about dam safety, which is regulated at the state level within the United States. We want to make sure that dam removal is viewed as a beneficial practice. We look at ways to streamline restoration permitting, and we want to really help to improve the understanding around sediment in river systems, because that is so often a really tricky issue to deal with at these projects. So as we consider what are some of these enabling conditions where we can really use them as leverage to increase the rate of dam removal, dam safety is one that comes up often. This is a piece of regulation where we've had success encouraging dam removal. And we noticed that states with strong dam safety requirements had more dams removed, and this makes sense. Where dam owners are actually held responsible to pay for and to manage maintenance of their structures, they may not choose to keep their dams when repair costs are high. It just costs too much, and so they make a different evaluation whether or not they want it. In the United States, we're not building new dams, so most of our dams are somewhere between 60 and 300 years old, which means that most need maintenance if they haven't been regularly managed and kept up. Working again with our agencies and partners, we've worked to modernize dam safety regulations and ensure that those agencies are also adequately funded, because it's not just about having the regulations in place, but also making sure that those agencies can actually enforce those regulations. That change in dam safety laws alone has increased the rate of removal, but it also makes for safer communities and reduces fatalities at swimmings near many of these really old and dilapidated dams. So there's a real incentive that's not just related to the environmental regulations. Another piece that we're working on is to help our regulatory agencies understand that dam removal is a beneficial practice. For a long time, our environmental laws have viewed disturbance of the existing ecological condition as a negative. And of course, to remove dams, we create a lot of disturbance and we lose the areal extent of wetlands. So by that, I mean, you may go from a dam impoundment that may be 5 or 10 or more hectares in size, and when we remove the dam, we have less river and wetland area. But we've restored the function and we've restored a more diverse ecosystem. And so there's a lot of benefit to that. But for a long time, we haven't been able to capture that benefit and have that codified within our regulations. So we're working to establish within these regulations that these are positive benefits. This also requires promoting the research within academic institutions and ultimately new guidance with the agencies to really codify this. If you're interested in where you can find some of this research, the USGS Dam Removal Synthesis at the Powell Center is a fantastic place that really brings together a lot of the current research and published work. We're also looking to really make sure that we understand sediment within our systems, understand how these changes are impacting different types of habitat. And we're also making sure that we have the economic studies to really be able to say, you know, there's not just an environmental benefit here, there's an economic benefit. I really love this picture. This is a picture of the mouth of the Elwha River as it empties into the ocean. And when we think about sediment is one of these issues that for so long, any kind of turbidity, any kind of disturbance is really seen as a negative. But through, by documenting where we see these changes in habitat and these beneficial ecosystem effects from dam removal and from releasing the sediment, like in this case, we're actually rebuilding the estuary system there. It's only by documenting that, by getting it into our papers, that we're helping people understand how these systems and how these kind of changes are really ultimately beneficial to the system. We've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years, and not only through removing all of those dams, but also in how we go about it and how we think about dams as a part of our public infrastructure. I think we're not only removing more dams today than we were 20 years ago, but I think we're doing a better job of it. I think we're designing better projects. I think we're going to continue to see challenges at individual projects, but that overall, we're going to see more dams being removed, more miles of river connected, cleaner water, sustainable fisheries, and safer communities. We're all really starting to understand this work and just how multifaceted the benefits can be, and I think it's an exciting time to be involved. So a few things we need to think about to keep the momentum going. So for the last bit of my presentation, I want to talk about where are we going and where do we need to go? Well, we have a big opportunity in the United States because we have a significant funding increase in federal programs that can go towards dam removal and fisheries restoration. It's also worth noting that while some of this money is for fisheries restoration, there's also funds available to remove hazardous and unsafe dams through dam safety programs. Because again, we've been making the link that dams and dam removal is not just about fisheries, it's also about public safety. There's also a lot of infrastructure programs that can feed into dam removal. And so we're thinking about how can we really make sure that we're using the funding out there effectively to get the most benefits. And something that we're hearing a lot is that funders and the government, they want to talk about not just one project at a time, but how do we get a lot of projects done? And over the years, we have used funding and enforcement around fisheries to work strategically across multiple dams within the same river or watershed. And our funders and our agencies like this. Often, sometimes there's been an opportunity at one dam that leads to managers to look at adjacent dams. So that's even more the case with these new funding opportunities. I think we may be able to see that we may be able to bundle lots of projects on a river, thinking about it system-wide instead of in the early days where we were kind of working at one project at a time. We've really made the case over the years that we can remove dams, that there's benefits for the community, for the fish, for the ecosystem, and I think we have an opportunity to, particularly as we're thinking about resiliency, as we're thinking about climate change, to look to where we can actually incorporate better planning and modernize our infrastructure and remove dams at the same time. So an example here on this project out of the Pacific Northwest, this is a case where this dam provided the water intake for a major city many miles away. It's also on an endangered salmon river. And what we were able to do, it certainly cost a decent amount of money, but actually to move the water intake upstream, create a safer, better long-term water intake structure and remove this dam at the same time. So instead of just assuming we need to keep that dam in place, there's actually a more modern, better solution that we can get by removing the dam and improving the water intake. And so we end up with better results for the fish and better results for the community that relies on this water. Relatedly, I think that we can also start incorporating dam removal into our long-term plans. Very often, and I can say anyone who's ever worked on a dam removal will tell you that often the most complicated part of the project is not removing the dam and restoring the river, but actually managing the bridges, the pipes, the walls, the buildings that are nearby, because obviously we don't want to impact public safety and we don't want to impact our water utilities, our bridges, anything like that. So how can we make sure that as we are maybe, let's say, building a bridge, rebuilding a bridge, that look downstream, if there's a dam, an outdated dam, maybe with a big hole in it that looks like it's failing, let's think about building that bridge and with the assumption that that dam is not going to be in place long term, so that the costs of the bridge are actually handled as part of the transportation infrastructure. And that way, when we come in and we need to remove the dam, we're not paying for the bridge work at the same time as we're removing the dam. So we can be more thoughtful in our planning, because very often we end up sort of duplicating efforts because we've just made assumptions that the dams are going to be in place for all time. We haven't really trained our planners and our engineers to think about what's going on within the rivers that they're crossing. We're just trying to get things across the river, or we're just trying to keep buildings upright without thinking about how whether or not that dam is going to be there permanently. And if we're able to do that, incorporate dams or removals into our long-term planning, I think it's going to pay benefits across our community infrastructure, our ecosystems, and ultimately result in economic benefits. We need to keep honing our messages and bringing the public along with us on why these projects are so important. For a long time, these projects have been in the purview of a group of conservation organizations like mine, but ultimately these are public infrastructure projects. These are big pieces of infrastructure in our public waterways, and they're impacting our communities. And we should be thinking and considering how we can invest across all types of infrastructure, our transportation, our water infrastructure, and dams as a part of all of that, and invest the funding and planning really across all levels. And on a very different note, if we're going to be thinking long term, if we want to be doing more of this work, if we want to be encouraging this type of work, we need to bring people and the institutions that they work with and for along with us. And that means doing what we can to help train the next generation, mentoring someone who's new, who's coming into the field, make space for people to get additional opportunities, whether it's speaking opportunities or publishing opportunities, or just a chance to be at meetings with colleagues. We want to build our networks. And because when we work together with engineers and biologists and practitioners and the regulators, everybody starts to see and understand these projects and the benefits that they can have, and we learn from one another. And I think the more we do that, we're going to get better projects designed. The permitting is going to be more effective. We're going to have more people coming along with us. The most fun I have doing this work is when I get to work with my river colleagues, not just at American Rivers and the Nature Conservancy, but across the industry with our engineering consultants, with our academic institutions and partners. When we're all we bring a different perspective. And I think we should really make room for that and make time for that. And hopefully the people that we work for can see that, and we can build that into the work that we need to do. At American Rivers and the Nature Conservancy, we're also working to make sure that we increase the diversity of the people that we are working with and talking to, and the people that are seeing the benefits of this. So we want to make sure that we are making space for more voices in these projects, that we're getting more perspective. And because again, we're going to get better project results, and we're going to have better long-term results across the board. I really believe, and my organizations believe as well, that dam removal is a part of the solution. And as we build sustainable and resilient communities, we want healthy rivers. This picture here, I like to include this as an example of multi-benefit success. This is from a dam removal project in the northeastern US, and you can see that clearly the site is being enjoyed by a lot of species here. And so we talk about these projects as sometimes being ecosystem projects, but that ecosystem has got to include our friends and our neighbors, whether they've got scales or fins or webs or they walk on 2 feet. We want everybody to be part of these projects because I think that they're really exciting, and I think that in the end we're going to have safer, healthier communities when we see these projects through. I'd like to close by again saying thank you. It's really wonderful to be invited and to know that these conversations are happening, because as I said, we need a lot of us talking about these, puzzling through these challenges. I think the field of ecological restoration really is just taking off, and it's so good to see there's so many people involved and really trying to figure out how we can get to a place that we have safe, healthy, and resilient communities. So thank you so much, and I hope you really enjoy the rest of the conference.